Sarah Martinez had always been the reliable one in her family. At 34, she worked 2 jobs to keep her small apartment and help support her elderly mother who lived across town. Every morning she would wake up at 5:30, prepare breakfast for her teenage daughter Emma, and rush to her first job at the local diner, where she served coffee and breakfast to the same regular customers who had been coming there for years. Her second job was at a grocery store chain where she worked evenings, stocking shelves and helping customers find what they needed. Sarah had been doing this routine for 3 years, ever since her husband died in a construction accident, leaving her with mounting medical bills and a mortgage that seemed impossible to manage on a single income. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Sarah felt the familiar weight of stress pressing down on her shoulders. The electricity bill had arrived yesterday, and it was higher than expected due to the early cold snap that had hit their town. Her daughter needed new school supplies, and her mother's prescription medications were getting more expensive each month. Sarah calculated the numbers in her head as she walked through the automatic doors of Peterson's grocery store, where she had been working for the past 8 months. The store was busy with the usual morning rush of people grabbing coffee and picking up forgotten items before work. Sarah smiled and greeted her co-workers as she tied her green apron around her waist. She had always prided herself on being honest and hard-working. Her manager, Mr. Peterson, often praised her reliability and positive attitude with customers. As Sarah began arranging the produce section, she noticed a young mother with 2 small children trying to manage her shopping, while keeping her toddler from running into the aisles. The woman looked tired and overwhelmed, constantly checking her phone and counting items in her cart. Sarah recognized that look of financial stress because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. During her lunch break, Sarah sat in the employee break room eating a sandwich she had packed from home to save money. She scrolled through her phone, checking her bank account balance and feeling the familiar knot in her stomach when she saw how little money remained until her next paycheck. The rent was due in 5 days, and she was still $40 short even, after working extra hours whenever possible. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Emma asking if she could get money for a school field trip that cost $25. All of Emma's friends were going, and Sarah knew how important it was for her daughter to feel included, especially after losing her father. Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing back that she would figure something out. When Sarah returned to work after her break, she was assigned to the pharmacy section to help organize the shelves. As she worked, she found herself standing in front of the over-the-counter medication aisle, looking at the small bottles of pain relievers and vitamins. Her mother had been asking for help with the cost of her arthritis medication, which wasn't fully covered by insurance. Without really thinking about it, Sarah picked up a small bottle of vitamin supplements that her mother's doctor had recommended, but that they couldn't afford. She held it in her hand, looking around to see if anyone was watching. The store was busy, and her supervisor was helping customers at the pharmacy counter on the other side of the department. Sarah had never stolen anything in her entire life. She had always taught Emma about the importance of honesty and doing the right thing. But as she stood there holding the vitamins, thinking about her mother's pain and her daughter's field trip and the mounting bills that seemed to multiply faster than her paychecks, something inside her snapped. She quickly slipped the small bottle into her apron pocket, her heart racing so fast she thought everyone in the store could hear it. She continued working, trying to act normal, but her hands were shaking as she arranged products on the shelves. Part of her wanted to put the vitamins back immediately, but another part of her felt desperate enough to take this small risk. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of anxiety and guilt. Every time someone walked past her or a supervisor came into view, Sarah was certain they knew what she had done. She kept touching her apron pocket where the bottle was hidden, wondering if she should find a way to put it back without anyone noticing. When Sarah's shift ended at 9 o'clock, she walked toward the employee exit with her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She had made it through the entire evening without anyone noticing the vitamins in her apron pocket, but now she had to actually leave the store with them. Her hands trembled as she punched out on the time clock and said goodnight to her co-workers who were finishing their shifts. The employee exit led directly to the parking lot, bypassing the main customer checkout area. Sarah had walked through this door hundreds of times before without giving it a second thought, but tonight every step felt like it took forever. She was almost at the door when she heard a voice behind her calling her name. "Sarah, could you wait a moment, please?" She turned around to see Mr. Peterson, the store manager, walking toward her with a security guard she had seen before but never spoken to. Her stomach dropped, and she felt like she might throw up right there in the hallway. Somehow they knew what she had done. "Is there something wrong, Mr. Peterson?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady even though her entire body was shaking. The security guard, whose name tag read Dennis, stepped forward and spoke in a calm but firm tone. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to the office. There are some questions we need to ask you about some merchandise." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to think of what to say. Should she deny everything? Should she immediately confess and beg for forgiveness? She thought about Emma waiting at home, probably doing homework and expecting her mother to return with good news about the field trip money. She thought about her mother, who was likely sitting in her chair, wondering if Sarah would be able to help with the medication costs this month. The walk to the manager's office felt like the longest journey of Sarah's life. Other employees they passed in the hallway looked at her with curiosity and concern. She had always been well-liked at work, known for being helpful and honest. Now she felt like everyone was staring at her as if they could see her shame written across her face. In the small office behind the customer service desk, Mr. Peterson closed the door and gestured for Sarah to sit in the chair across from his desk. Dennis positioned himself by the door, and Sarah realized there was no way out of this situation. The office smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies, and the fluorescent light above buzzed loudly in the uncomfortable silence. "Sarah," Mr. Peterson began, his voice more disappointed than angry. "You've been a good employee for the 8 months you've worked here. Your performance reviews have always been positive, and customers frequently mention how helpful you are. That's why this is particularly difficult for me." Dennis pulled out a small tablet device and showed Sarah the screen. It displayed security camera footage of her in the pharmacy section, clearly showing the moment she slipped the vitamins into her apron pocket. The timestamp showed it had happened at 2:47 in the afternoon, during what should have been a routine restocking shift. "We review security footage regularly as part of our loss prevention program," Dennis explained. "When we saw this, we had to investigate further. We've been watching for the past few hours to see what you would do." Sarah stared at the screen, watching herself make the decision that had led to this moment. She looked tired and desperate in the footage, and she could see the exact moment when her desperation overcame her better judgment. The evidence was undeniable, and she knew there was no point in trying to lie or make excuses. "I'm sorry," she whispered, reaching into her apron pocket to pull out the vitamin bottle. "I know this doesn't make it right, but I've never done anything like this before. I didn't know what else to do." Mr. Peterson took the vitamins and set them on his desk. "Sarah, I need you to understand that this is theft regardless of the circumstances. The value of these vitamins is $18.99. According to company policy, any theft over $15 requires us to call the police." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Police, arrest, criminal record. She thought about Emma finding out that her mother had been arrested for stealing. She thought about her job at the diner and whether they would fire her if they discovered she had been arrested for shoplifting. She thought about her mother, who depended on her for so much support. "Please," Sarah said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I know what I did was wrong, and I'm willing to face the consequences. But is there any way we can handle this without involving the police? I can pay for the vitamins, and I promise this will never happen again." Dennis shook his head sympathetically. "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but we have policies we have to follow. These policies protect both the store and other employees. If we made exceptions even for good employees, it would set a precedent that could cause bigger problems." Mr. Peterson picked up his phone. "Sarah, I'm required to call the police now. I want you to know that this decision isn't personal, and I do believe you when you say this isn't something you normally do. But I have a responsibility to the store and to our other employees." As Sarah sat in that small office listening to Mr. Peterson speak to the police dispatcher, she realized her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. In less than an hour, she would be arrested for the first time in her life, all because of a decision that had seemed like the only option when she was desperate and overwhelmed. Officer Jennifer Walsh arrived at Peterson's grocery store 20 minutes after the call. Sarah had been sitting in the manager's office, staring at her hands and trying to process what was happening to her life. She had called Emma to tell her she would be late getting home, making up an excuse about staying to help with inventory. She couldn't bear the thought of her daughter worrying about where she was. Officer Walsh was a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. She had been responding to shoplifting calls for over 15 years and had seen people from all walks of life make desperate decisions. When she entered the office and saw Sarah, she could immediately tell this wasn't a typical case of a habitual shoplifter. "Mrs. Martinez," Officer Walsh said as she sat down across from Sarah, "I need to read you your rights and then ask you some questions about what happened here today." As the Miranda rights were read aloud, each word felt like a hammer blow to Sarah's chest. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." She had heard these words hundreds of times in movies and television shows, but hearing them directed at her personally made everything feel surreal and terrifying. "Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you?" Officer Walsh asked. "Yes," Sarah replied quietly, her voice barely audible. The questions that followed were straightforward but humiliating. Officer Walsh asked about Sarah's employment history, her financial situation, and whether she had ever been arrested before. When Sarah explained that this was her first offense and that she had been struggling financially since her husband's death, Officer Walsh's expression softened slightly, but her professional duties remained unchanged. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to need to place you under arrest for retail theft," Officer Walsh said as she stood up. "The store manager has indicated that they want to press charges, which means you'll need to come with me to the station for booking." The handcuffs felt cold and heavy on Sarah's wrists. As Officer Walsh led her through the store toward the front entrance, Sarah noticed that several customers and employees had gathered to watch. Some looked curious, others seemed sympathetic, but all of their stares made Sarah feel like she wanted to disappear completely. She kept her head down and tried to walk as normally as possible despite the handcuffs. The ride to the police station was quiet, except for the sound of the police radio crackling, with other calls throughout the city. Sarah sat in the back seat behind the protective barrier, looking out the window at the familiar streets of her neighborhood. She passed the elementary school where Emma had attended classes for 6 years, the library where they often went on Saturday mornings, and the small park where they sometimes had picnics when money was especially tight. At the police station, the booking process was more extensive than Sarah had expected. She was photographed from multiple angles, fingerprinted, and asked to provide detailed personal information including her social security number, employment history, and emergency contacts. When asked for an emergency contact, Sarah hesitated before giving them her sister Maria's phone number, knowing that Maria would be shocked and disappointed to receive this kind of call. The holding cell was small and stark, with concrete walls painted an institutional green color and a single bench that was uncomfortable to sit on for more than a few minutes. Sarah was the only person in the cell, which somehow made the experience even more isolating. She could hear conversations and phone calls from the main police station, but the words were muffled and unclear. After what felt like hours but was probably only 90 minutes, Officer Walsh returned to tell Sarah that she would be released on her own recognizance, meaning she didn't have to pay bail but had promised to appear in court for her arraignment in 3 weeks. She was given several papers explaining the charges against her and the date and time of her court appearance. "Mrs. Martinez," Officer Walsh said as she walked Sarah to the front desk to collect her personal belongings, "I want you to know that many people facing financial hardship have found themselves in similar situations. There are resources available that might be able to help you, including legal aid attorneys if you can't afford a lawyer." Sarah nodded and thanked the officer, but her mind was already racing ahead to more immediate concerns. How was she going to explain being 3 hours late getting home to Emma? What would happen to her job at the grocery store? Would the diner fire her when they found out about the arrest? How was she going to pay for a lawyer when she could barely afford her regular monthly expenses? The walk from the police station to the bus stop felt like the longest journey of her life. It was nearly midnight and the streets were mostly empty except for a few late-night establishments that were still open. Sarah had never felt more alone or more uncertain about her future. She kept replaying the events of the evening in her mind, wondering if there had been any other choice she could have made. When she finally arrived home, she found Emma asleep on the couch with her homework spread out on the coffee table. There was a note next to Emma's math book that read, "Mom, I waited up as long as I could. Hope everything is okay at work. Love you." Sarah carefully covered her daughter with a blanket and gathered up the homework materials, trying not to wake her. Sitting in her kitchen at 12:30 in the morning, Sarah realized that her arrest was only the beginning of what was likely to be a very difficult period in their lives. She had no idea how she was going to handle the legal consequences, potential job loss, and financial crisis that were now heading toward her family like a freight train. The next morning, Sarah woke up after only 3 hours of sleep, hoping desperately that the previous evening had been a nightmare. But the court papers on her kitchen table and the memory of handcuffs on her wrists confirmed that her arrest had been painfully real. She had to call in sick to her morning shift at the diner, something she had never done unless Emma was genuinely ill. Emma noticed something was wrong immediately when she came down for breakfast. Sarah was usually busy and energetic in the mornings, but today she sat quietly at the table, staring into her coffee cup with dark circles under her eyes. "Mom, are you okay? You look really tired," Emma said as she poured cereal into her bowl. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just didn't sleep well last night. How did your homework go?" Sarah tried to sound normal, but her voice felt strained and artificial. Emma studied her mother's face with the perceptive eyes of a teenager who had learned to read her mother's moods carefully since her father's death. "Are you sure everything is okay? You seem really upset about something." Sarah forced a smile and reached over to smooth Emma's hair. "Everything is fine. I just have some work stuff to figure out. Don't worry about it." After Emma left for school, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and tried to make sense of her situation. She had been fired from Peterson's grocery store effective immediately, which meant she had lost nearly half of her income overnight. Her court appearance was scheduled for 3 weeks from now, and she had no idea how much a lawyer would cost or whether she could afford one at all. The phone rang at 10:30, and Sarah's heart skipped when she saw it was her supervisor from the diner, Mrs. Campbell. "Sarah, I got your message about being sick today. That's not like you at all. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Campbell's voice was concerned but friendly. "Yes, I'm just feeling under the weather. I should be fine to come in tomorrow," Sarah replied, hoping Mrs. Campbell couldn't hear the shakiness in her voice. "Well, take care of yourself. We've got the morning rush covered, but we'll need you tomorrow for sure. Feel better?" After hanging up, Sarah realized she was going to have to tell Mrs. Campbell about her arrest eventually. Most employers required notification if an employee was arrested, and Sarah couldn't risk losing her only remaining job by hiding the truth. But she decided to wait until after her court appearance to see how serious the consequences might be. That afternoon, Sarah's sister Maria called after receiving the emergency contact call from the police station. "Sarah, what in the world is going on? The police called me last night saying you had been arrested for shoplifting. This has to be some kind of mistake." Sarah broke down and told Maria the entire story, from the mounting financial pressure to her moment of desperation in the pharmacy aisle, to her night in the police station. Maria listened without interrupting, but Sarah could hear the shock and disappointment in her sister's silence. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me how bad things had gotten? I know money is tight for us too, but we could have helped with something. Mom's medications, Emma's field trip money. You didn't have to handle all of this alone." "I didn't want to be a burden to anyone else," Sarah said through her tears. "I thought I could figure it out on my own. I never imagined I would do something like this." Maria drove over that evening, and the three of them sat down for a difficult conversation. Emma was confused and scared when she learned about her mother's arrest, asking questions that Sarah struggled to answer honestly without frightening her daughter even more. "What does this mean for us?" Emma asked. "Are you going to go to jail? Are we going to lose our apartment?" Sarah took her daughter's hands and looked her in the eyes. "I don't know exactly what's going to happen yet, but I promise you that we're going to get through this together. I made a serious mistake, and now I have to face the consequences, but that doesn't mean we're going to lose everything." Maria offered to help with some of their immediate expenses and to be there for Emma if Sarah had to spend any time in jail, but the uncertainty was overwhelming for all of them. None of them had any experience with the legal system, and Sarah felt like she was navigating a foreign country without a map or translator. Over the next few days, Sarah tried to research her options online and called several lawyers to ask about their fees. Most of the attorneys she spoke with wanted retainers of at least $1,500. which was more than Sarah could manage even with Maria's help. She finally found a legal aid organization that might be able to provide assistance to low-income defendants, but there was a waiting list and no guarantee that she would qualify for their services. During this time, Sarah continued working at the diner, but her heart wasn't in it. She made mistakes with orders, forgot to refill coffee cups, and generally seemed distracted and overwhelmed. Mrs. Campbell pulled her aside after a particularly difficult shift and asked again if everything was okay. "Sarah, you've been one of our best employees for 3 years, but something is clearly wrong. If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. Is it something with Emma, your mother, financial troubles?" Sarah almost broke down and told Mrs. Campbell everything right there in the storage room behind the kitchen. The kindness in her supervisor's voice and the offer of help made Sarah realize how isolated she had been trying to handle everything alone. But the fear of losing her job kept her from revealing the truth. "I'm just going through a rough patch right now, but I'm working on getting things sorted out. Thank you for being patient with me." Mrs. Campbell nodded but looked unconvinced. "Well, you know we care about you here. Don't try to handle everything by yourself." That night, as Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, she realized that her arrest was affecting every aspect of her life in ways she hadn't anticipated. The stress was making her a worse employee, a more distant mother, and an increasingly anxious person. She knew she needed to find a way to address the legal situation quickly, before it destroyed the stability she had worked so hard to build for Emma and herself. 2 weeks after her arrest, Sarah finally received a call back from the legal aid organization. Attorney Rebecca Chen was assigned to her case and wanted to meet the following day to discuss her options. Sarah took a long lunch break from the diner and met Attorney Chen at the legal aid office, which was located in an older building downtown that smelled like coffee and old paper. Attorney Chen was a woman in her late 30s who had been working with low-income defendants for over 10 years. She had seen hundreds of cases similar to Sarah's and understood the complex pressures that led ordinary people to make desperate decisions. "Mrs. Martinez, I've reviewed the police report and the evidence in your case. The good news is that this is your first offense and the value of the stolen merchandise was under $20. The bad news is that the store wants to prosecute, which means we need to prepare for court." Attorney Chen explained that Sarah had several options. She could plead guilty and hope for a lenient sentence, possibly including community service and probation instead of jail time. She could try to negotiate a plea agreement that might reduce the charges or penalties. Or she could plead not guilty and go to trial, though Attorney Chen warned that the evidence against Sarah was very strong. "What I'd like to do first," Attorney Chen said, "is reach out to the prosecutor and the store manager to see if there's any possibility of resolving this case through a diversion program. These programs are designed for first-time offenders who are dealing with financial hardship. If you qualify, you might be able to avoid a criminal conviction altogether by completing community service and paying restitution." For the first time in 2 weeks, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. A diversion program sounded like exactly what she needed to get her life back on track without destroying Emma's future or her own employment prospects. Attorney Chen spent the next week making phone calls and filing paperwork. She discovered that the county did have a pre-trial diversion program for nonviolent first-time offenders, but admission required approval from both the prosecutor's office and the victim, which in this case was Peterson's grocery store. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Michael Torres, was initially reluctant to approve Sarah for the program because the store had specifically requested prosecution. However, after reviewing Sarah's background and financial situation, he agreed to consider the diversion program if Mr. Peterson would withdraw his request for full prosecution. Attorney Chen called Sarah on a Thursday evening with mixed news. "I spoke with Mr. Peterson today, and he's willing to meet with you to discuss the possibility of agreeing to the diversion program. He wants to hear from you directly about your situation and your plans to make sure something like this doesn't happen again." The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at Peterson's grocery store during the afternoon, when the store was less busy. Sarah felt nervous and ashamed as she walked through the front doors of the store where she had worked for 8 months and where she had made the worst decision of her life. Mr. Peterson met her at the customer service desk and led her to his office, the same room where she had been confronted about the theft 3 weeks earlier. This time, though, the atmosphere was different. Instead of the formal interrogation she remembered, Mr. Peterson seemed genuinely interested in understanding her story. "Sarah, I want you to know that firing you and pressing charges wasn't an easy decision for me. You were a good employee, and I could see that you were struggling, but I have a responsibility to protect the store and set an example for other employees." Sarah nodded and took a deep breath before speaking. "Mr. Peterson, I want you to know how sorry I am for what I did. I betrayed your trust and the trust of my co-workers. I know saying sorry doesn't undo what happened, but I need you to understand that I had never done anything like this before, and I will never do anything like this again." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah told Mr. Peterson about her husband's death, her struggles with medical debt, her efforts to work 2 jobs while raising Emma alone, and the desperate moment when she felt like she had no other options. She didn't try to make excuses for her behavior, but she wanted him to understand that her actions came from desperation rather than dishonesty. Mr. Peterson listened carefully and asked several questions about Sarah's current financial situation and her plans for addressing the problems that had led to the theft. He seemed particularly interested in whether Sarah had sought help from social services, community organizations, or other family members. "Sarah, I believe that you're genuinely remorseful and that this was an isolated incident. I also believe that you're a basically honest person who made a terrible decision under extreme pressure. That's why I'm willing to support your admission into the diversion program." Sarah felt overwhelming relief and gratitude. "Thank you so much, Mr. Peterson. I know I don't deserve your understanding, but I promise I won't let you down." Mr. Peterson held up his hand. "There are conditions, though. You'll need to complete 100 hours of community service, pay restitution for the stolen merchandise, and stay out of trouble for 1 full year. If you successfully complete the program, the charges will be dropped and you won't have a criminal record." He paused and looked directly at Sarah. "There's something else, though. I've been thinking about your situation since our conversation with the police, and I think there might be another way I can help." Sarah looked at him with surprise and confusion. She couldn't imagine what kind of help he might be referring to. "I've been talking with some other business owners in town about the problems that working families face when they can't make ends meet despite working multiple jobs. We're starting a small emergency assistance fund for employees and community members who find themselves in temporary financial crises." Mr. Peterson reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. "It's not much, but we've raised enough money to help a few families each month with emergency expenses like medical bills, car repairs, or school costs. The program is designed to provide short-term assistance that helps people avoid desperate decisions." He handed Sarah an application form. "I'd like you to be one of the first people to apply for assistance through this program. It won't solve all of your problems, but it might help you get back on your feet while you're completing the diversion program." Sarah stared at the application in disbelief. Not only was Mr. Peterson giving her a second chance by agreeing to the diversion program, but he was also offering practical help to address the financial problems that had led to her arrest in the first place. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the community center gymnasium putting the finishing touches on a display board for the monthly volunteer appreciation event. She had completed her 100 hours of community service the week before, spending her time helping at the local food bank, tutoring adults who were studying for their high school equivalency exams, and assisting elderly residents at a nearby nursing home. The diversion program had been more transformative than Sarah had ever expected. Not only had it allowed her to avoid a criminal conviction, but the community service requirement had connected her with people and organizations she never would have encountered otherwise. Through her work at the food bank, she had met other families facing similar financial struggles and had learned about resources and support systems she hadn't known existed. Emma joined her mother at the community center, carrying a box of cookies she had baked for the volunteers who were being honored that evening. At 15, Emma had matured considerably over the past 6 months, taking on additional responsibilities at home and developing a deeper understanding of the challenges her family faced. "Mom, Mrs. Rodriguez from the food bank told me that you're going to be the volunteer coordinator next month." "That's amazing," Emma said as she arranged the cookies on a serving tray. Sarah smiled as she adjusted the banner hanging above their display table. "It's only a part-time position, but it comes with a small stipend that will really help with our budget. And the best part is that I'll be able to help other families who are going through difficult times." The emergency assistance fund that Mr. Peterson had helped establish had provided Sarah with enough money to cover Emma's field trip costs, catch up on their electricity bill, and purchase her mother's arthritis medication for 3 months. More importantly, the fund had connected Sarah with a financial counselor who helped her create a realistic budget and explore options for increasing her income. Mrs. Campbell, from the diner, had been incredibly supportive throughout Sarah's legal troubles. When Sarah finally told her about the arrest and the diversion program, Mrs. Campbell had offered additional shifts and helped Sarah apply for a promotion to assistant manager. The raise wasn't huge, but combined with her new part-time position at the community center, Sarah was finally earning enough to cover their basic expenses without constant anxiety. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the community center director from the small stage at one end of the gymnasium, "we're here tonight to recognize volunteers who have made exceptional contributions to our community over the past year." As various volunteers were called forward to receive certificates and small gifts, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that terrible evening in October. The arrest had been the most frightening experience of her life, but it had also forced her to confront problems she had been struggling with alone for too long. Attorney Chen had stayed in touch with Sarah throughout the diversion program and had become something of a mentor. She had encouraged Sarah to share her story with other families facing similar pressures and had connected her with advocacy groups working to address the systemic issues that led to financial desperation. "Our final recognition tonight," the director continued, "goes to someone who joined our volunteer community under difficult circumstances, but has since become one of our most dedicated and effective volunteers. Sarah Martinez has completed over 150 hours of service, well beyond her required commitment, and has agreed to take on a leadership role in our emergency assistance program." Sarah was surprised to hear her name called. She had known she would be recognized for completing her community service, but she hadn't expected any special acknowledgement. Emma squeezed her mother's hand as Sarah walked to the front of the room to accept her certificate. "Sarah's story," the director said as she handed over the certificate, "reminds us that people in crisis need support and second chances, not just punishment." Her transformation from someone who made a desperate mistake to someone who now helps others avoid similar situations shows the power of community-based solutions to complex problems. After the ceremony, Mr. Peterson approached Sarah and Emma near the refreshment table. Sarah hadn't seen him since their meeting 6 months earlier, and she felt nervous about what he might say. "Sarah, I wanted to congratulate you on completing the diversion program successfully. I've heard wonderful things about your volunteer work from several people in town. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I can never fully express how grateful I am that you gave me a second chance. It changed everything for me and Emma." Mr. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when I started the Emergency Assistance Fund, I wasn't sure if it would really make a difference. But seeing how it helped your family and several others has convinced me that we need to expand the program. I was hoping you might be interested in helping us develop better ways to reach families before they get to a crisis point." Sarah looked at Emma, who was beaming with pride, and then back at Mr. Peterson. "I would be honored to help with that. I think I have a pretty good understanding of what it feels like to feel like you're out of options." As they walked home that evening, Emma asked her mother about the conversation with Mr. Peterson and what kind of work they might do together to help other families. "I think," Sarah said as they turned onto their street, "we're going to try to make sure that other people don't have to face the kind of impossible choices that I faced last year. Sometimes when people make mistakes, it's because they need help, not because they're bad people." Emma nodded seriously, "Like how you always tell me that everyone deserves a second chance if they're willing to work for it." "Exactly like that," Sarah replied, realizing that the most important lesson from her experience wasn't about the consequences of poor decisions, but about the power of community support and the possibility of redemption when people are willing to take responsibility for their mistakes and work to rebuild trust. That night, as Sarah tucked the Volunteer Appreciation Certificate into a frame next to Emma's Honor Roll certificates and her late husband's military service awards, she reflected on how the worst mistake of her life had ultimately led to some of the most meaningful work she had ever done. The secret that had left everyone speechless wasn't just her arrest for shoplifting, but the remarkable transformation that had followed when her community chose to offer support and opportunity instead of simply punishment.